Yesterday, I went down to Washington, D.C. after I taped the show yesterday early in the morning, which is why it's a little shorter than normal because I had to catch a flight. So I go down because Ben Smith, formerly of the New York Times, formerly of BuzzFeed, now runs and founded Semafor, which is trying to be a less partisan news outlet. Like they do more than just politics. And he asked me if I would go down and speak at his like kind of conference. And I said, yes, I know him a little bit from the summers. He and I go to the same place on the Jersey Shore at times. And so I said yes. And while I like Ben, I have to say my own experience was Ben doesn't understand what we're doing at all. Not here at the Megyn Kelly Show, not with what you do, Emily, online. He's still stuck very much still in legacy media. And I would submit to the audience that his questions to me showed that. It also showed a lack of familiarity with what we do here on this particular show and what I sound like in anchoring this show. So I put together some of the questions just so you could see what I'm talking about. Here's that montage of some of the questions. Watch this.
Was appear on stage with President Trump on November 4th, my birthday,
yes.
in Pittsburgh, and say, President Trump gets it, the reasons you're voting, it lists the reasons you're voting for him, a lot to do with masculinity, which I want to ask you about later. And I wonder how you think about that in terms of, does it compromise you as a journalist? Do you benefit from this environment in which people are losing trust in everyone else and turning to you? I think your audience probably, I would guess, mostly voted for Trump, but I know lots of people who watch you and didn't. Do you worry that they can't trust you, that as you cover him going forward, that they'll kind of think you're in the tank? But ultimately, you depend for information on the people that you're criticizing, don't you? Do you ever feel like it would be better if you had a producer occasionally, like in the old days, being like, Megyn, maybe that's too much? I was talking to another broadcaster the other night, and she said, one thing Megyn does that is most of us don't do is go after other people in media really personally. Like there's sort of a gentleman's agreement in a lot of media to not attack each other personally. You had a very heated riff on, I'm forgetting her name, but the mother of Elon Musk's latest child. The bulk of YouTube is always going to be, here is like an incredible monologue that went viral. Do you feel like you've been shaped by the medium, that you've been pushed into these sort of like more heated monologues, these kind of, these maybe more confrontative? I don't know, that there's something about that kind of monologue that's about trying to go viral.
By the way, what I said about Elon's partner and the baby would have been nothing, but she decided to go public and then to play the victim. And my point was simply...
You went after her.
Okay. So perhaps you've gotten a flavor of what Ben Smith thinks of the Megyn Kelly Show. It does not appear that he is a daily watcher. It appears he's been consuming his information about us from left-wing blogs, which is, I guess, not a surprise. But I personally felt that was a really grossly unfair characterization in those questions, and those are the questions he asked. I think there were two others that weren't about my particular show. That I just thought it was very slanted against what we do here. And he obviously, I think, has an upturned nose when it comes to digital media in general. And I'll give you one other, just to kick it off, Emily, and that is, you heard him say there that you spoke for President Trump the night before the election, and you were very focused on masculinity. Like, that's why you were voting for Donald Trump, masculinity, which is also totally false and not what I said at that rally. What I said was, he's under fire right now for having said he will protect women. And I believe he will protect women. And I welcome that, both on behalf of myself, my daughter, and other people's daughters, because I think he'll close the border and we won't have more Laken Rileys. And I think he'll close women's sports to men and boys. And we won't have more Peyton McNabbs, the girl who got hurt in North Carolina thanks to the spiked volleyball in her face. That's what I said. And I also spoke of the forgotten boys in this country and what's been done to them as we've demonized boys over the past 10 years. It wasn't about fucking masculinity, but that's what a leftist hears when you say that kind of stuff about President Trump. Anyway, your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, it would be if he had been peppering those questions to you as like a devil's advocate, that may have been different. But I think you're right to say that's how he was actually characterizing the show. And it sounds to me like he's not familiar with like what you do regularly on the program at all. I agree, because if you had been listening to or watching the show leading up to the election, you would have had all of the context of how seriously you took those issues, how deeply you covered those issues, and how much they mattered to you, whether it was sports, immigration, whatever. And all of that would have made way more sense. But if you're only getting your information sort of dripped out through, the coverage from liberal bloggers and people on Twitter, then yeah, that sort of sounds exactly like my impression of the questions. And by the way, another thing it misunderstands. I mean, I think even to ask the question about whether you wish you had a producer, I thought the implication was that, maybe you're going off the rails too much or whatever. But yeah. By the way, the reason people like this medium is because of they get both the level of the quality and analysis and sophistication and political commentary, but they trust it more because they see you with no filter. And that's the whole point. Yeah, exactly right. It's so funny to me that, here's this man, formerly of the Times, formerly of BuzzFeed, looking at me, the lady anchor, like, wouldn't it be better for you if somebody were able to control you so you didn't get, go off the rails so much? And of course I was like, no. I mean, just the implication of it. I'm not responsible for what I say. And I wish someone could come into this show and put the bridle on. Poor Steve Krakauer just isn't able to do it. It's so ridiculous. It's ridiculous. That's not how it's ever worked, frankly, between me and my producers. Though at Fox, I understood there were guardrails in terms of how to behave on cable news. So here, he pivots from that Trump speech I gave the night before the election into this. This is where he takes it. Sot 2.
I mean, I think your audience probably, I would guess, mostly voted for Trump, but I know lots of people who watch you and didn't. Do you worry that they can't trust you, that as you cover him going forward, that they'll kind of think you're in the tank?
No, not at all. I mean, our numbers are huge. Yeah. I know you just had CNN on. In January, last month, on their YouTube feed, they got 155 million views, and we were 147 million. Me.
Is your cost structure slightly lower? Is that what you're...
Exactly. Well, I'm just saying that's one show, the Megyn Kelly Show, just me and my 6 producers, versus every single show on CNN, every single thing they put on YouTube. I was within 6 or 7 million of them. The month of the election, November, I beat them. I beat all of them. By the way, I beat NBC, I beat CBS, all of them regularly, the Sky News. November, I beat them all of them. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, all of them. So I'm not having a trust issue.
Right. So he's suggesting people aren't going to trust you. They're going to think you're in the tank. Aren't you a hack now because you spoke for Trump? And again, this is why I say, he doesn't watch the show. He doesn't understand what we do. Everybody listening to the show right now knows I do criticize Trump and his administration plenty. I mean, just look at our show yesterday where we opened up, this before I sat with him, talking about how I did not agree with what they were doing on the press pool, right? Trump didn't speak to me for the better part of late 23, early 24, because he was angry about that interview he gave me where I pressed him on some of the lawfare questions. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant to be on the wrong side of the president. I like him, so I want him to like me. But my job and my integrity is more important to me. But all these questions were geared toward, you've sold your soul, you've become a hack, you just do things to get patted on the head by the president and YouTube views.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I thought was interesting from that question is that, again, we spent the first part of the show talking about how the White House screwed up yesterday. I mean, you don't need to, it's not like you have to miss one episode and then you're out of the loop. You do this all the time. That's why people like you and trust you. So it's actually part of the trust. Part of the trust is built into you being yeah, I think people should vote for Donald Trump. Here is why. And then you can assess my coverage of Trump's policies. You can assess my coverage of Kamala Harris's proposals through that lens. It's actually his question is completely missing the point.
It's a difference between owning your bias and then proceeding, accordingly, trying to do the best you can as a fair commentator and journalist, or just pretending it doesn't exist and then leaning into your bias because you want to express it through the news coverage, which you are pretending is fair and objective, right? It's this way I tell you what I'm rooting for, then I try to give you fair coverage, and anything I say that's opinion, is from that perspective. What the mainstream does, so-called, is they don't own any of their bias. They claim they have none, and they just manifest it through their alleged fact reporting, which is just so pernicious. I mean, that's why they're failing. All right, here was the capper, right? So we get to the question, about Tucker Carlson. Years ago, Tucker was doxxed. These hateful leftist groups showed up at his home in Washington, D.C., where his wife was alone. One of his children may have been home as well. I can't remember right now. But for sure, Tucker wasn't there, and his wife was in there and scared. They were angry, and they were chanting, and they were getting all on his lawn. He had been doxxed, and now his wife was threatened. And Ben Smith actually tried to compare my comments the other day about Rachel Maddow's sanctimony to that. Watch this.
Years ago, protesters went to Tucker Carlson's home. I think you probably both remember that pretty vividly. You called it at the time stomach turning and said it has to stop. But, it's funny, I was talking to another broadcaster the other night, and she said, one thing Megyn does that is most of us don't do is go after other people in media really personally. Like there's sort of a gentleman's agreement in a lot of media to not attack each other personally. And that I don't know if you think that's true as a broadcast person.
Why don't you do me a favor and Google Megyn Kelly NBC and tell me whether the journalists
you recently
don't
talked
go after
about
each other personally.
Maddow's public complaints and sort of said that she should put up or shut up, basically, but also about her expensive real estate, about her homes. And I'm curious, do you have any compunction about getting that personal?
No. I would never give out her address. That would be a bridge too far, and it doesn't compare to what happened to Tucker in any way, shape, or form. But Rachel Maddow got out there and tried to act like, I'm a woman of the working class. I'm here to represent the poor staffers who could lose their jobs now as a result of Joy Reid biting it. And meanwhile, she's collecting $25 million a year. She's got multiple homes worth millions. You know what? Why don't you take a $2 million pay cut and save 10 of those jobs? If you feel that sad, you don't even have to pay it out of your bank account. Just tell them, pay me $23 million next year instead of $25. She won't do it. She wants to seem virtuous and sanctimonious, but in fact, she's only the latter because she won't actually put any money on the line. And an example of the exorbitant life she leads while she's trying to remind us, I've worked so many jobs, the jobs I've worked, puts to the point her hypocrisy.
What'd you make of that one, Emily?
That's incredible. I mean, the way that Tucker ended up getting all of these insane protests is that people were actually doxing him and they were encouraging protests outside of his home to make him uncomfortable. It was the point of the protest. So that question is grossly, grossly unfair. And also, I think baked into it was that hilarious assertion laundered through this broadcast person that apparently said, it's just very unusual to go after people. It's like, no, it's unusual for libs to go after other libs. Like, yes, the rich liberals do not go after the rich liberals, but they will absolutely take shots at people that are not, couth in their book club circles on the Upper East Side. Give me a freaking break. What are you talking about?
That's right. They don't go after each other if it's another liberal. That's exactly right. But if you're a conservative, you've been fair game for a long time, which again, Ben Smith does not understand. But just as a refresher, my team did put together a few examples of people violating the gentleman's agreement about which we know nothing. And I've been in cable news for 20 years. Here it is.
Black Santa truther Megyn Kelly. Of course, there's more from Megyn Kelly, who seems to be sometimes the world's angriest multimillionaire.
I mean, look, it works for her podcast. Magnifying minorities, picking up on fringe issues.
Megyn Kelly, the blackface expert, the Jesus and Santa are white lady, is not going to crawl her way back to social relevance.
She owes a bigger apology to folks of color around the country.
That's silly, and it's disingenuous, and it's just as ignorant and racist as the statement itself. She said something stupid. She said something indefensible.
This Kremlin propagandist, Tucker Carlson.
The image he was portraying on Fox, I would actually argue it's un-American. It's a darkened heart. That's right. What it is. That comes from a darkened heart.
The idea of Tucker Carlson being in that mob that day and not wetting his pants is hard to imagine.
I think Tucker Carlson gives a lot of airtime to hate toward the LGBTQ community.
He is heinous. He is vulgar. He's atrocious.
The stuff Tucker and Laura Ingraham say every night, it could be written by white supremacists. And there's a section of this manifesto where the shooter starts talking about, people always say diversity is strength. I can hear it in Tucker's voice. He says this all the time, right? But the Ben Shapiros of the world say this.
To our most prominent white nationalists, he arguably has done more on cable television to spread the gospel of hate, fear, and paranoia than anyone since radio propagandist Father Coughlin in the Nazi era of the 1930s.
The worst thing about it is that Tucker, to me, was always a dumb person's idea of what a smart bigot sounded like.
The most racist show in the history of cable news.
It's weird how I didn't get the memo on the gentleman's agreement that Ben Smith and his anonymous broadcast source received. Hello, wake up. You don't just go out and buy a life jacket when the boat is already sinking, and you don't buy gold when the economy has already collapsed. Clearly, others are heeding this advice as gold hit all-time highs already this year. It's not too late for you too, and you could have Birch Gold help you diversify into physical gold. Birch Gold specializes in helping you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold for no money out of pocket. One recent 5-star review said Birch Gold was, quote, knowledgeable, helpful, non-pressure. Get your free info kit on gold by texting the letters MK to the numbers 989898. There is no obligation, just useful information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and countless 5-star reviews, text MK to 989898 and let the experts at Birch Gold help you secure your future today with gold. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.